Soggy Waffles and never capitalize the W in a Western blot because a proper noun it is not. Western blot is actually a pun on the Southern blot, and so the Southern blot was named after Edwin Southern, and so that should be capitalized, but your Western blot and your Northern blot, those are just puns on the Southern blot, and so you don't need to capitalize those first letters. Edwin Southern invented the Southern blot, where you separate DNA pieces by their size using gel electrophoresis, blot those, transfer those to a membrane, and then probe that membrane with labeled pieces of DNA, so typically radioactively labeled DNA that matches, it's complementary to sequences you want to detect, and so then you go and probe for it. And then scientists were like, okay, well, could we do this with RNA? Like, we'll use DNA probes because DNA is more stable than RNA, but what if we use gel electrophoresis to separate RNA pieces by size, and then we can make DNA probes that are radio labeled and detect the RNA on the membrane. Then they're like, okay, well, let's name it a Northern blot. That sounds funny, right? And so we get the Northern blot. And now we have Neil Burnett coming. And Neil Burnett is like, well, what about proteins? Well, how are we going to detect proteins? We don't have that sequence complementarity, but we do have antibodies. So we can use labeled antibodies that recognize specific proteins. Similarly to with the nucleic acids, we'll separate them by size using gel electrophoresis, transfer them to a membrane where we can actually go in and probe them with those antibodies, and voila, we've got this blotting technique. But what to name it? Well, let's kind of keep on that directional pun. Which direction do we go? Well, he was located in Seattle, that's on the West Coast, so Western blot it was. And now more scientists want to get in on the fun, and so then we get Eastern blots, which is kind of just fake. I mean, it's just like looking for modifications on proteins, you're still using antibodies, so it's the same as a Western blot, but you're looking for modifications rather than the protein itself. So maybe you're looking for some sort of like phosphorylation, glycosylation, that sort of thing. So you could call that an Eastern blot, but most people would still just call it a Western blot. But then more people were like, I want to get on the fun, so then you get Northwestern and Northeastern, Midwestern, all these various blottings. But the general principle is the same. You've got a mix of biomolecules, so maybe it's a cell extract, something like that. You want to look for a specific thing. So what you're going to do is you're going to actually separate those molecules out based on some property. Typically this is going to be size using gel electrophoresis. Now you've got the molecules in those samples separated by size. They're in that gel though. If you want to actually go and probe them to see what specific things are present and how much, you need to actually transfer them out of that gel where they would just diffuse out and into a membrane. And once they're on the membrane, now you're going to be able to go and take your probes and detect those specific things.